All the characters in this story are over the age of 18. Alice was divorced from her husband, but few people cared. So when she moved to a cute little town on the East Coast and got a job at the mayor's office, she was greeted with a friendlier welcome than she might have expected. Thanks to the help of Mayor Elizabeth Daniels, she permanently rented a charming cottage right on the Atlantic Ocean. Alice was soon joined by her son Brian, and she enrolled him in the local high school. Elizabeth helped her with landscaping and familiarizing herself with the area, making Alice feel more comfortable and welcome in her new surroundings. Alice was often in awe of the natural beauty of her new surroundings. The sound of the waves crashing on the shore was a constant reminder of the tranquility she longed for. She took long walks along the beach, often accompanied by Elizabeth, who pointed out local landmarks and talked about the history of the town. These moments made Alice feel more connected to her new home, and she developed a real friendship with Elizabeth. But even to her new friend, Alice didn't tell her new friend what made her leave New York City for a provincial backwater. Brian Stevens was already 18 years old. He was a tall, thin, and handsome young man with a withdrawn character who was interested in basketball, not girls. He had no friends at his new school, but this fact did not bother him much because he was a good student and did not get into conflicts with teachers and classmates. He preferred to keep to himself, spending most of his time either playing basketball or reading comic books in his room. One day, he came home with a black eye and a broken cheekbone. His mother was terrified, but Brian steadfastly refused to answer questions and preferred to retire to his room. He refused to eat dinner, so Alice made him ham and cheese sandwiches and took them upstairs. Since he'd been uncommunicative since he was a child, Alice didn't ask him for answers, but the fact that he'd been in a fight upset her terribly. She couldn't wait to find out the truth, but she knew that pushing Brian too hard would only make him more withdrawn. Brian was in bed, reading an illustrated comic book magazine, when Alice put a plate of sandwiches on the table and sat down next to him. Brian put the magazine aside and looked at his mother, frowning slightly. He seemed to want to talk about something important, but hesitated to start the conversation. Alice smiled, encouraging him, hoping he would finally open up to her. "Mom, is it true what they say about Elizabeth?" Alice wondered. "We're not close enough for me to ask her those questions. She's my boss. I don't think I, or you, or anyone else should be interested in her orientation. It's everyone's private business." Realizing that her son had asked the question for a reason, she added, "Why are you so concerned?" "A guy at school said Elizabeth wants you," Brian said. Alice laughed to lighten the mood. "I should be flattered." "Sure, the last 6 years have been hard on us, but that's no reason to rush into the arms of a strange man or woman. I'm glad someone else finds me attractive." "You're the most beautiful woman in the world," Brian assured her, sincerely. Alice felt like she was about to faint. She hadn't felt this good in a long time. A feverish blush appeared on her face, and her eyes shone like Christmas lights. Mother and son smiled at each other, sharing an unspoken bond that seemed to grow stronger every day. An hour later, they woke up refreshed, showered together, and went down to the kitchen where an appetizing dinner awaited them. It was still quite early, although it was already getting dark outside the window. Alice had changed into a silk, semi-transparent negligee that showed more than it concealed. They sat in front of the TV for a while, but their favorite comedian show didn't interest them that day, so they soon made love again right in the living room to the actors' silly jokes. The warmth and intimacy they shared seemed to fill the entire house, making it feel more like home than ever before. Alice didn't ask again, and Brian promised, "You're my favorite person in the world." "If I can't trust you, I won't be able to trust anyone." His words reassured Alice, who had always feared losing the close bond she had with her son. She knew their relationship was unconventional, but it was the only thing that gave her life meaning. The next day, when Alice entered the mayor's office, the secretary informed her that Elizabeth had summoned her to her office. Grabbing her file, Alice headed for the chief's office, but Elizabeth's grim face immediately discouraged her from any easy conversation. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and Alice sensed that something serious was about to be discussed. "Is something wrong?" she asked anxiously, having been given permission to sit down. "You should know better," Elizabeth replied. "Did Brian make a mess at school?" "I don't understand," Alice admitted sincerely, though a premonition of trouble crept into her soul. She had a lingering feeling that no matter what Elizabeth said, it would change everything. "I heard about the fight your son got into," Elizabeth said. "I feel guilty for not confessing my orientation to you." Yes, everything you've heard about me is true. I wanted to apologize, so I went to your cottage." "Should I go on?" "I don't think you should." Alice blushed with embarrassment. More than anything, she wanted to disappear. The mayor's voice burned her heart, and the full weight of the situation seemed to press down on her shoulders. "You did this to your own son," Elizabeth stated flatly. "It's reprehensible." "Are you going to fire me?" asked Alice in a barely audible whisper. "I am neither God nor judge, but I would like to avoid a scandal." "Don't tell me I don't like you. I do." Elizabeth chuckled when Alice flinched. "I think you deserve respect for what you did 2 years ago." Alice turned pale and stared at the impassive Elizabeth in horror. "You know my brother works in the prosecutor's office. He was one of the prosecutors at the trial." "Then why did you hire me?" asked Alice, her voice trembling. "I like you," Elizabeth smiled bitterly. "You are very frank, but I cannot accept your offer." "I'm not blackmailing you, Alice. Just accept my patronage. Otherwise, very soon, everyone will know not only about your past, but your present as well. We have a very small town, and rumors spread instantly." Alice cooked dinner as if nothing had happened and sat by the TV while she waited for Brian, who had basketball practice. But Brian could sense her mood from a mile away, so he asked her what was wrong. The concern in his eyes made Alice's heart ache, and she realized she couldn't keep the truth from him any longer. Alice had promised herself she would keep it to herself, but under her son's intense scanning gaze, her promise crumbled to dust. "She knows," Alice said. "Elizabeth knows about us and about your father." "Stupid woman," Brian growled angrily. "She's blackmailing you, isn't she? But she won't get away with it." "You're mine, and mine alone." His imperiousness was both comforting and frightening to Alice, who was afraid of what her son might do to protect her. "Oh, yes, my love, but I am so afraid." "She is a cruel woman, and we can't hide from her." "We're not going to hide anymore," Brian said. "I'm going to make things right." "But how?" asked Alice, her voice trembling. "You don't have to worry about that." Brian suddenly smiled so confidently that Alice had no doubt her smart son would figure out how to save them. She calmed down enough to offer him dinner, but he had another treat in mind. I want you to show me how you girls please yourselves, he said. Are you ready, honey? She whispered. Their union was so harmonious that it felt like it was made in heaven. Their intimacy surpassed anything Alice had ever experienced, and she knew that no one could ever come between them. Brian was skipping school, dealing with a problem named Elizabeth. The woman had immediately struck him as overly friendly, if not to say mocking. Yes, she had helped them at first, but not without malice. Brian couldn't imagine sharing his mother's affection with anyone else, so he had to get rid of her attention at all costs. He spent hours thinking about his next move, determined to protect his mother from anyone who threatened their relationship. Elizabeth was working from home that day, which made Brian's task easier. He came uninvited, but it was unlikely she would refuse to receive him. Elizabeth had not expected him to show up and was immediately wary. Like a hospitable hostess, she offered the young man a drink. He didn't refuse whiskey on the rocks. Brian, I don't understand what I owe you, Elizabeth said, her voice sounding cautious. I can explain, Mrs. Daniels, Brian replied calmly. You blackmailed my mother, and that was a mistake. If you've been following the proceedings, you remember what a cad my father was. I don't want to be afraid and hide anymore, and you, Mrs. Daniels, are threatening my peace of mind. What do you mean? Asked Elizabeth, retreating to the tall French window overlooking the garden. The fear in her eyes was obvious, and Brian realized he had the upper hand. Only that I don't want to hear any more of your insulting suggestions. You won't do that, Elizabeth whispered in horror. Wanna bet? Brian replied, his voice cold and calculating. Brian didn't play basketball on a whim. He was the best defender on the team because he could anticipate his opponent's next move, so he easily intercepted the woman rushing to the phone and plowed her to the floor. They made love, and he avenged his mother. The power he felt in that moment was intoxicating, and he knew he would do anything to protect Alice. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, he said with a smirk. It was a prime example of how I deal with my mother's abusers. You apologize to her, or I'll go back and repeat the lesson. Remember that, Miss Daniels. He was already at the door when he heard her weak, hoarse voice. You killed your father, didn't you? How clever of you, Miss Mayor, Brian grinned. Goodbye, or rather, goodbye for now. When Brian returned home, he found his mother in her bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale and her eyes full of worry. Promise me that we'll always be together, no matter what happens, she said, her voice trembling. What could happen to us, Brian? He replied, trying to reassure her. You're hiding something, Alice said, her eyes searching his face for an answer. I talked to Elizabeth today. She won't be bothering us anymore, Brian said confidently. Are you sure? She's a real commitment. You can't get rid of them that easily. She's safe for us, Brian assured her. I'm very glad she is. You're my hero, my protector. Alice and Brian are still in a relationship, and they are very happy with each other. Over time, their bond has only grown stronger, and they have found comfort in each other. Brian went to UCLA and Alice got a job as a research assistant at a successful law firm in Los Angeles. She is expecting their second child, and they are looking forward to starting their new life together. Despite the difficulties they have faced, they remain devoted to each other and are determined to protect their love at all costs.